right, guys, I'm Don Ford. This is Progressive Insider. I am here with another interview and a long string, in-depth interviews with congressional candidates all over the country. Today, I have with us Ihssane Leckey from District 4 in Massachusetts. Ihssane, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Don. How are you?
I am hanging in there. It's a tough, challenging time for everyone right now, but it's so important that we not forget about the congressional candidates that are out there trying to challenge the system and make sure that we have a fighting chance in this crisis. Because let's be honest, whoever is the incoming class of Congress is going to have a lot to determine about how we rebuild and restructure whatever the new normal is. And I bet some people in your district could use the new normal, right?
Yeah, I guess, the new normal is also the interim. We don't know how life is going to be after COVID, but people are doing their best to cope, to keep the community safe. But, in our districts, because of the way the income distribution is, where there's, extreme wealth on one side and extreme poverty on the other, you hear a mix of story and the real conditions that people are going through in the working class in cities like Fall River and Taunton and Attleboro, and a lot of areas in between are reflecting what millions in America are going through right now. So we're doing our best to reach out to serve them right now that they need our help the most. And we look forward to serving them in a much more deeper and meaningful way when we are, when I'm Congresswoman.
Sounds good. What's your, now we've been talking to a lot of candidates about their different relief efforts, and every district's a little different, every state's a little different, every county's a little different. What are you guys doing that is helping your voters right now, or your constituents, I should say, because you got to help everybody, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we have been organizing COVID-19 relief calls. We focus on communities that are in the most need, and we connect them with community aid networks around, closer to them. And also, if there's nothing close to them, we have some areas that have food deserts, etc. We reach out to folks who are organizing to bring that outreach to them. So that's on one side. On the other side, we have a website, on our website, ihssane.org, we have a page dedicated to COVID-19 relief. I also have been hosting Facebook Lives and, bringing people from experts, from people from the community to show, what is the effect at the deeper level? Like, what is the effect on elders who are receiving Social Security right now, and what should we do to help them on the federal level and on the local level? What is the effect on restaurant workers who are not unionized? So who is out there? We had a conversation with folks from Rock United who are extending direct aid, and et cetera. And we've hosted so many town halls, etc., that are like rapid response to things that happen. For example, with the Mashpee Wampanoag, who were facing basically losing their land in the midst of this COVID-19 crisis. So what we're doing is to, it's basically, what would I do if I'm in Congress? What would I do to help my community?
That's like my second to last question. So let's just get to it now. What would you do in Congress?
Yeah, so if I was in Congress, I would still absolutely, have operations of direct relief in the district, and bringing resources to constituents that are most vulnerable. And I would, of course, have a lot more to do in Congress, like making sure that we pass a $2,000 monthly check for everyone in the country to be able to sustain themselves, to be able to pay the rent, put food on the table. But a lot of what I see, that's been done by our government right now is just, it's wrong. It's actually making this crisis take longer than it needs to, economically. And it's really, undermining the most vulnerable amongst us and the people who have been on the front lines for a very long time and have been underrepresented.
Yeah, you know, they've really driven the scarcity of money argument a little too hard on people, to the point that the former middle class, which is split into an upper lower class and a lower higher class, they're driven for this money so hard that they're pushing us to reopen faster than we should under these circumstances. And it is absolutely going to make this crisis go on longer. And I'm sure you're seeing communities that can't handle this crisis going on longer than they already are. And you know, and in addition to that, you know, you brought up helping elderly people. And when we talk about somebody living on $1,200 for 10 weeks, there's a real conversation needs to happen about Social Security and how little we expect the elderly to live on. When how can we expect anyone to thrive, especially in their late years? So there's just a lot of things that are being brought on. I think that that we hadn't seen before under COVID, that we as progressives had seen, but now the rest of the world is seeing. Do you feel like there's some sort of a shift in people's mentality on these issues?
Absolutely, there is a shift. I think people who, especially people who have been living in comfort, are now starting to think that in order for them to be safe, everybody else needs to be safe, right? And if we are calling on this reopening of the economy when we don't have testing, when we don't have a vaccine, when we can't even, you know, prevent people from getting this virus if they go outside or be, you know, in groups.
I'll give you the full list. We don't have a preventative treatment, we don't have an active treatment, and we don't have any vaccine on things. So there's like 3 individual things that any one of them would help us, because we do a lot of interviews with virologists that talk about this issue. So there's 3 issues, just so that everybody knows, and we are nowhere near close on any of them, not to mention our antibody tests aren't even consistent or reliable at the moment.
Right. So with those things in mind, every time we talk about reopening the economy, what is that saying is actually asking people to go out and die, so that the you know, the shareholders can still, you know, fill up their money with fill up their pockets with a lot of money, and the working class would go and die for that. And so the working class has been dying for that in many ways, right? The working class has been dying for that. From the pollution in their lungs, from the lack of healthcare, from the sub-minimum wage payments that they get for their jobs, from working 2 and 3 jobs, not being able to meet the skyrocketing housing prices. And it's been so much on the working class that, you know, they had already been, you know, not being able to sustain a livable, you know, a dignified life, as I say.
That's a good way to put it. I think livable wage doesn't say enough. That's a great way to put it. The dignified life is something like you have to be able to thrive, pursuit of happiness, right? I mean, isn't that in the whole, I believe it's in an important document we hold here.
I I believe so. I think in this country we have literally stopped talking about happiness as a factor in life. Like, people are just trying to get by and they're not able to. If we talk about happiness, there's a whole other plethora of policies that we're going to need to look into. We have to look into universal family care, right? If you really want to be a happy individual, suppose you are a parent or somebody who cares for an elder or for somebody with disabilities. How are you going to achieve happiness in your life if you're literally going bankrupt just from providing this care? If you literally are making life choices like having children based on how much money you make, right? So when we talk about happiness, we are way behind that. We're way behind. And I think there are some measurements internationally that measure, you know, the happiness of the individual in different countries, and the United States is like, we're way behind.
Yeah, we're very low. That list is a real thing, and we are very, very
low. We're very, very low.
Can I throw an idea by you?
Yes.
We were talking to a union rep a little while ago, and they were talking about the working class versus the donor class. And she said something about them being, what are we calling them? Necessary workers? What's the word we're using right now? I'm forgetting what it is. It's you know, for the workers that have to work. And they're not getting paid any extra work, like critical workers. But the thing is, she called them expendable workers. But for me, I'm realizing after doing all these interviews with people all over the country where this environmental racism is really important, because it's a leading cause in COVID deaths for people of color all over the country, and that's because of this problem that's been going on for years. And so I feel like we're not really saying it right. These people are treated as disposable. They're almost treated like single-use people. And I think that we need more people in Congress to recognize that life is valuable and people aren't disposable, because you're hitting on this and I'm like really being emotionally, it's hitting me emotionally hearing you talk about this right now. And I'm just realizing how they're not taking the value of life, because I said giving people the opportunity to happiness is valuing their life at the end of the day.
Yes, and the thing is, thank you for bringing up the emotional part of this. You know, there's emotional hardship when we have these conversations, when we talk to people who are directly affected and who have been unseen before COVID, and now people care about their hurt and pain, because they're realizing that if we don't address their needs, that our whole economy is going to go down. So it becomes this whole conversation about the economy and the stock market and the shareholders and the 401ks, and instead of actually listening to the actual emotional hurt and pain that these people have been laboring for a long time and are now to, you know, at the very, very end of what they can bear. And, you know, Don, I was one of those people, and I think that it's important in representation that we actually, you know, be represented by people who have been in that painful labor. When I was a restaurant worker, and, you know, I didn't have anybody to stand up for me. I was paid tipped wages. You know, my boss decided to steal my end of week pay when I, you know, faced him and said, I don't want to deal with this sexual harassment at this workplace that he actually encouraged. And I was, you know, I was jobless. I couldn't pay the rent. It was a nightmare. But it made me realize that personal experience that I went through many times, not just in that one instance, many times, it helped me understand deeply what our working class goes through on a daily basis, what millions of people in America go through on a daily basis. And I say it in America especially because this is the wealthiest country in the world, where things like this are unnecessary. There's no explanation. There's no reason why this should be happening. We should have every tool out there to protect the working people, to protect the working class. And we can only do that if we're actually represented by a government that has been through those personal lived experiences.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. I'm going to say something that might get edited out, but I'm going to say it anyways. In 2018, I sat down with a young candidate named Ocasio-Cortez in a bodega in Brooklyn or the Bronx. I don't know where I was, to be honest with you. And I had a conversation with her saying that the thing that was wrong with her district was that the people in it did not feel represented by Crowley. Crowley had never gone to them. He never approached them. He never reached out to them. He never connected. He never even had a primary, which made it extra easy for her. Not easy, but you know what I'm trying to say. It's a little less difficult. But you cannot undervalue that factor that you just brought up for 1 second. It is so important in progressive politics that the candidate represent the people and the people feel like their candidate represent them. And that if that doesn't happen with a progressive candidate, then there's really no hope for them. And I feel that you're taking the right approach right here. And I hope you're taking the approach that more candidates will take of feeling like, well, I know what I went through, and someone has to speak for these millions of people that are being left unheard. And this comes down, this whole thing, this whole thing comes around to actually a really simple issue that we talk a lot about, that it's not necessarily as connected as people might think. And this is the gerrymandering of her district. And we see this in a lot of places. And we're almost, as we're going on in this conversation, my own thoughts on this are changing, because I'm almost seeing it as like an owner class and a disposable class. And the owner class feels like they own everybody, and they treat everybody else like they could just get someone at any moment to replace you like it's nothing because you are disposable. And that is what has to change. And this is empowered by how they gerrymander these districts, by having these rich areas holding 1/4 of the district. Her district, if you look at it in mass, is just right on the edge. The tip of it goes the edge of Boston. And there's a very wealthy area right here that she was explaining to me earlier that fights to not be a part of Boston, that allows them to control this entire working class to the south west of them. Did I get that about right?
Right.
Yeah, and so this allows the owners of the businesses to come in and really manhandle, for lack of a better word, abuse, right, their workers. And then there's no coverage because the congressional rep is only looking at what this, this donor class or owner class wants or cares about. And so that's essentially what you're stepping up to fight, because there are more of them than there are of those guys, right?
Right, and that's been, it's been proven already. We are in an open race, and some of those who were able to raise over $1 million, have already banked on those relationships of the wealthiest in the district who, want to have the backing of Wall Street, right? Who have no interest in universal policies or, in Medicare for all or Green New Deal or getting corporate money out of politics. It's not to their personal benefit. They have a lot of wealth and they want to continue to build on that existing wealth. So they're less likely to be interested in a candidate like myself unless they are wealthy and they have a sense of moral obligation to change the course of our country and change it into a country that into an economy that works for all, into the justice for all agenda that I've been preaching everywhere in the district. But again, we cannot rely on the rich few to win seats like this one. We have to actually go deep in the communities. We have to rely on anyone across across the whole country who wants to change our government and grow our progressive bench to help these races. And especially, and you mentioned AOC before, AOC said this as well. She had mentioned that when we are in these so-called safe blue seats, right? I'm in Massachusetts, it's a blue state, this is a safe blue seat. A lot of people don't pay attention to these races, right? A lot of people think that flipping seats is the most important, but there is endless evidence that every time these so-called safe blue seats are represented by a corporate Democrat or a used to be Republican, became Democrat with intentions to win in a so-called safe blue seat, we see that in the way they legislate, we see that in the way they the lack of service for the communities that are hurt the most. And we see that in the course of our, of how our country got to Trump. Like, how did we get to this era right now? And let me tell you, Don, when I was a Wall Street regulator at the Federal Reserve, I saw.
Whoa. You were a federal. Say that one more time again. Did we miss that somewhere in this interview? Because we're going to come back around. Tell your story. We're going to come back to that, please.
So when I was a Wall Street regulator as a special examiner at the Federal Reserve, I worked on a program that made sure that these giant banks like Goldman Sachs and Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, et cetera, the biggest ones, who had received enormous bailouts in the 2008 financial crisis and were deemed too big to fail, that they are planning ahead for a future financial crisis that could be worse than 2008, and that they're setting aside rainy day money to be able to bail themselves out and to continue lending in the economy. So they would continue extending lending to small businesses, et cetera, homes, you call it. So under this program, number one, in 2016, when Trump took office, he started threatening the existence of the Federal Reserve altogether. Number two, he started.
She chuckled because I made a like, how do you even do that face? I just want everyone to know that was just
Right.
Sorry.
Right. So I mean, let's face it. With any business, right? Their worst nightmare is to set aside money and not invest it, right? And so what we were doing,
and then
we were
if that's
able
their worst nightmare, then why do we have tons of money in offshore accounts that they can't reinvest? We'll come back.
well, then, yeah, well. So you're cracking me up. So first of all, this program under the DoddFrank was super important. And so for the last decade, we made sure that these giant banks have some level of money to kind of, save themselves in case of a crisis, which is pretty good for what we see right now. They'll be able to survive for a little bit, maybe a couple months, maybe a month or two before they start getting massive bailouts again. But number two is that Trump wanted to dismantle that program. And to do that, he needed support from both the Democrats and the Republicans. And the Democrats, they voted along the Republicans to deregulate. And that deregulation has hurt us in unprecedented ways. And we see it right now. We see that major businesses in Wall Street who should have been subject to these scenarios of future disasters and have set aside rainy day money they won the case to not be included in that program, and now they're getting bailouts.
So
blank checks.
So I've got a question for you then. Is that part of why Trump? Because I didn't know about your background, and we can talk about all kinds of stuff now. We could. Okay, so here's the question: is this why Trump is pushing to reopen the government sooner? Because the banks are going to need this. I mean, the banks are already getting bailouts to keep the stock market going, but we're not seeing it as a direct state bank bailout, right? We're seeing it as like a lender bailout, and they're kind of putting this thing. But I feel like what you're talking about is like a ticking time bomb, because if they deregulated this issue and they used it for like stock buybacks or whatever they ended up using it with, because I've definitely heard about this issue in sort of progressive circles, that that we're looking at this huge bailout coming if we don't actually get, I mean, even much more massive than anything we've ever seen before, not just the banks, but the people and our entire economy. And that's why they're rushing everything, because they deregulated this stuff that would have protected us from this.
Yes. So basically, when what we're looking at in terms of bailouts right now is like the little drop in the ocean is what happened already. But the big ones can happen even 6 months down the line, right? Because remember, first of all, we have the people who are just, they've lost their jobs, they're living in poverty, they're not able to be participants in the economy, they're not able to spend. And then we have people who are able to work from home, continue to receive, their normal pay, but they're not going to be spending. They're not going to be traveling. They're not going to trust going into crowds, right, and spending in restaurants.
This is actually what I've been talking about. This is what I've been talking about, right? Because we can't call the last package stimulus, like everyone's been calling it, even though we use the same stimulus law to get the relief package through. You have to call relief because mom and pops aren't open to boost the GDP, because that money needs to get respent. I mean, that's basically what you're saying, right? Like, we can't go and spend it on any of the things that actually make the money worth more. So it's not going to function otherwise. It's just keeping us alive.
Exactly.
I would like to talk more about this economic issues outside of your campaign, because this is such a complicated subject, and you've already cut through so much of it to explain it better to people. So I really hope on just that alone, we can do something to do another one of these as things change, because we're going to see more bailouts. We're going to see more of these situations going on. They're going to be more complicated, and we have to figure out how to inject the people bailout in there. We have to get that $2,000 a month.
Exactly. Yes.
To get the rent freeze.
Yes. So the people bailout should be a bailout that enables people to continue to participate in the economy. And what that means is that people should be able to continue to pay their rent, to pay their mortgages, to pay for food on the table, to, buy diapers for their children or their elders. It has to be in a way where consumption continues to happen, right? And let me just make it clear. You and I have talked about the humanity side of this, right? The life with dignity, and that is the most important. But we now live under a government that lacks morals and that is bought by Wall Street, okay? And under that scenario of being bought by Wall Street is losing. And the last resort they're gonna have is to actually get another bailout from the government. And the government is going to bail out Wall Street directly with no conditions. And the people are going to continue to lose their jobs, continue to lose their pay, and continue to fall into poverty. And that is the nightmare that we're living in right now. And if anyone in Congress, and I know there's just a very, very few who know about these things. I would name Elizabeth Warren, I would name Bernie Sanders, I would name Katie Porter. These are the people who are on the progressive side who actually understand how important it is that we bail out the people first. I'm not saying we're not going to need to bail out the banks. We are going to need to bail out the banks, but we have to bail out the people first. We have to think about what's next from COVID, right? Why is it that we are living in this cycle of recessions and of depressions? And when we're being hit by crises like COVID or any future natural disasters that could hit, Florida, could hit Central America, that we're not prepared. Why is it that we're not prepared? And the only answer to that I see is super rich people greed. That's the only answer.
Yeah, you're totally right about that. And I think that it comes down to a really simple idea that we talked about already, and how you regulate those two ideas, right? One is capitalism over profit over people, right? And the problem with that is that capitalism and an unfettered capitalism has no rules. There are no limits on what you can do theoretically. So you can do whatever isn't explicitly illegal. When you put people first, people have limits. So there are limits on what profit can do, because putting people first creates automatic regulations for capitalism. And that's why all these folks don't want that. And that's why they don't want you getting UI benefits. That's why they don't want people getting their pandemic uninsurance assistance. That's why they want people going back to work. And right now, so we need more people like you, Ihssane. We need more people who have a good grasp of what's happening. And I'm so happy to hear that you have this really extensive background as a Wall Street regulator, because there are not enough dang Wall Street regulators in Congress. And there's this whole conversation right now about how do we pay for it? Right. How do we do these things? And this is slowly going away. How quickly should that argument just be totally forgotten about?
Well, and every time I'm asked that question, I ask a question right back. How do we pay for the Wall Street bailouts? Can somebody explain to me, how do we pay for trillions of dollars in Wall Street bailouts that already took place? And let me remind you, we're not taking public ownership in these companies that are receiving bailouts. We're not putting conditions on them to continue to not furlough or let go of people.
Yeah,
we're not putting any conditions. We're just giving them the money, and we're saying, oh yeah, you can continue to pay your shareholders. You can continue to pay your bonuses, and you can do whatever you want with this money. Just pretend that somehow this is going to trickle down and help the sole proprietor in your corner, in the corner of your street. And it's not going to. And as we've seen it, barbershops are closed, restaurants are closed, cafes are closed. We continue to see people suffering from lack of health care. People are scared to call their doctor because of the bill that's going to follow. It isn't helping. It isn't bailing out Wall Street alone. It is not the way
Mm-hmm.
that we're going to uplift our economy or make it resilient for the future.
Okay, here's my question for you then, and we're gonna switch subjects and wrap this up because you are fantastic, and thank you so much for being here again. But my big question is, and this is something that I don't think a lot of people talk about, but it's sort of starting to make the murmurs on how much are we at the beck and call of two things: quarterly reports of these corporations and people that want these huge payouts, bonuses on what's happening. Because I feel like those two things are like the major drives on our economy. I used to say it's about progressive campaigns that we're at the beck and call of all these progressive organizations' fundraising teams. And I feel like it's the same idea with Wall Street, because they're just trying to do their own version of fundraising, which comes in quarterly reports, bailouts, and bonuses.
And what is your question again?
Yeah. So do we feel like how much are we at the beck and call right now of people trying to wrap up these quarterly reports? Because every 3 months they put out a new report on how much the business is making, and when those numbers drop, the stock becomes worth less, and they're trying to keep those numbers up. So what, they let us get one bad quarter out of COVID, and now they're trying to boost us back into a strong quarter to keep these numbers higher. Does it sound like total manicness?
Yeah, no, I don't foresee that this is a 1 quarter thing. Unfortunately, you have to also, when we think about COVID, and COVID has been so perfect in highlighting our international relationships, right? And our international reliance on countries across the world. So the part that is still yet to come is when the Southern Hemisphere is being totally submerged in COVID-19. And if that was actually, if the Southern Hemisphere was the only part of the world that has COVID-19, it would be a humongous humanitarian crisis. All the wealthy countries would be called to help. But now the wealthy countries, and we see, the US, we are only focused on what's inside of the US. But why is it important? And again, the humanitarian part aside, because we don't have a government that cares about the humanitarian side right now. Economically speaking, we have huge industries that rely on developing countries, right? And when developing countries shut down, we're going to have to bail them out in order for our businesses to continue. So here we are in the global scheme of things. And when you think of this, I want you to just think one more time about when national disasters of the global climate emergency are going to wipe out countries. What are we going to do then? We are so done with being a reactive country. We have to be proactive. We have to be proactive in thinking ahead for the crises that are coming up. We're not going to be able to stop everything from the climate crisis. We're not. We're going to have to, in the interim, deal with it, plan for it on the national and the international level. And we're going to have to get out of those fossil fuels that are burning the planet.
So I want to throw an idea on this, because you really kind of blew my mind right there, making a point that I had not considered. And we do a lot of COVID coverage here, and that is that we talk about the individual states. That the red states are opening up and the blue states are right next to it, and everyone's freaking out because we said it's like having it's like a smoking section on a plane. It's not that effective. But the South America is essentially the same pool of people. I mean, it's right there in America. I mean, I'm in Los Angeles, so when we talk about Mexico, it's in 3 hours away, something like that. I mean, it's not that far. And we talk about how this virus spreads and how fast it goes and how our economy works and how much we depend upon Mexico and the other countries for all the different, there's still a ton of produce that comes from there, even though we think of California as this huge produce provider. There's meats, there's products, there's all kinds, not to mention the workers who actually pick our produce in California come up from Mexico, which is a whole other issue we're dealing with right now. And so we have to be thinking about, you can't look at these things as I'm alone in this. You have to look at it as a global crisis, that we have to work together as a global problem. And Ihssane, I'm so glad you brought that up right now. Unfortunately, though, we do have to wrap up this interview. Thank you so much for being here. I really hope you will come back and talk more about your campaign and the regulations going on. You're in a good race. I think having a split up race hopefully you don't have progressives splitting the race, but if you have establishment people splitting the race, you have a really, really good chance, especially if you're doing excellent direct COVID relief. Now, I want everyone watching this to take a second, go to her website. That's, I'm gonna say it's Ihssane, but there's a hidden H in there because she's a beautiful Moroccan name. IHSSANE.com. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
.org.
.org. Thank you. Let me do that again. It's I looked at it yesterday. It's a very nice website, by the way. I love how you have the sun on your sign because it's like how you say your name, sort of. So it's sort of like
supposed to be the crown of the Statue of Liberty. We did our
best. Okay. I loved it. Well, it was like that's how when we're debating on how we do actually pronounce your name. I was like, I bet it's like the sun on her sign. Not actually, but it got in the right spot.
I love that.
Yeah. So, Ihssane, you are fantastic. I want everyone to go to her website. Please sign up to volunteer, sign up to get her email, sign up to get engaged, donate, because it sounds like the money that she's doing is going directly to COVID relief. She seems like a brilliant individual who we need more people like her in Congress. As a matter of fact, I don't think we have anyone like her in Congress right now. So please, Ihssane, please come back. Please do more interviews with us. But in the meantime, go to our website, check us out. I have been Don Ford. This has been Progressive Insider. In addition to her website, please check out our Patreon. It's really coming together very nicely for just $3 a month to get access to all cool kinds of community stuff we're working on. And we're building it. Come be a part of it and help us build it. That's how it works. So again, I've been Don Ford. This has been Progressive Insider.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Ihssane.